In a seemingly quiet little town in New Mexico, an ordinary address concealed disturbing secrets. When investigators arrived at that residence on July 22, 2022, they expected only to follow up on a report of improper discipline. What they found, however, was a grotesque scene where extreme filth and chaos were just the surface of something far darker. But how could a simple call about abuse turn into one of the most terrifying cases in the state's recent history? The answer lies in a chain of institutional failures and the manipulative skill of Jamie Cushman. And could it really be possible that so many people close by noticed nothing? Sadly, yes, because amid fear, manipulation, and neglect, silence became the rule. As the inspection unfolded, the team noticed an unusable kitchen, clogged bathrooms, and makeshift containers used in place of toilets. Everything pointed to abandonment, yet none of it revealed the true horror inside. That realization came when officers understood there was much more to uncover than just filth or domestic disorganization. The woman who answered the door was named Jamie Cushman. In a defensive tone, she tried to justify the state of the house, claiming persecution by Child Protective Services. To her, nothing was wrong, only a few problems any family could have, in her own words. That narrative, however, did not convince anyone. Even without physical proof of abuse yet, the investigators' sense of unease grew stronger. The children's eyes spoke louder than any excuse. When the minors were gently questioned, the first signs appeared that this household was hiding not just neglect, but cruel, unimaginable practices. From that point on, what began as a routine visit turned into an investigation marked by chains, cameras, psychological manipulation, and chilling accounts of torture. The house in Texaco stopped being a messy home and revealed itself as a true chamber of horrors. When speaking directly to the children, investigators quickly realized this wasn't about hygiene or negligence. The heavy silence, lowered eyes, and hesitation to talk revealed more than words ever could. When the oldest daughter was encouraged to tell the truth, the fear etched on her face left no doubt that something terrible was being concealed. Slowly, disturbing details began to emerge. Chains, inhumane punishments, and severe punitive rules showed that these children weren't just living in precarious conditions. They were subjected to a daily system of terror. Fear had become part of their routine, shaping their behavior and erasing any trace of childhood. Meanwhile, Jamie Cushman tried to maintain her victim narrative, complaining of supposed injustices from the system and hinting that whistleblowers had personal motives to hurt her. But this defensive stance didn't answer the pressing questions. Why were the children so terrified? Why did the house feel like it was hiding secrets in every corner? Her refusal to admit fault only raised more suspicions. It was already clear to investigators. This wasn't just a messy home, but an environment ruled by fear. And with every passing minute, more signs emerged that the worst was yet to be discovered. During the first inspection, the agents realized that the state of the residence went far beyond any notion of acceptable neglect. The kitchen was buried under piles of dirty dishes stacked so high that preparing a meal was impossible. Bathrooms, covered in mold and clogged, had no running water. Grotesque improvisations replaced toilets, buckets and containers that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. The stench was unbearable. Those conditions alone would have justified child protective intervention, but with a closer look, the officers understood the problem was much deeper. The filth wasn't just a sign of negligence, it was the symptom of systematic abandonment. The environment mirrored the children's psychological reality, trapped in fear, deprivation, and a dehumanizing routine. Faced with such evidence, Cushman still insisted on downplaying the situation. She claimed that all homes have imperfections and minimized the risks. She tried to convince the team she was being unfairly targeted, turning the inspection into what she called a personal attack. This defensive posture, paired with her rehearsed calmness, was a form of manipulation, an attempt to divert attention from what truly mattered. Her behavior set off alarms. Instead of showing outrage or concern for the children, Cushman seemed more focused on protecting her own image. The contrast between the gravity of the scene and her nonchalant attitude reinforced the sense that something far darker lurked behind her facade of victimhood. The mask she wore was starting to crack. When investigators finally managed to talk with the children, the atmosphere shifted entirely. The eldest, pressured to be honest, carried silent terror in her eyes. It was evident she held heavy secrets, forced into silence by fear of retaliation. The officers realized they weren't looking at ordinary neglect. They were facing a regime of discipline that had crossed every human boundary. The children began to reveal that they were often punished in cruel ways. Chains and padlocks weren't just items scattered around the home. They were instruments used to keep them locked in their rooms. Something as simple as trying to leave for the bathroom or to find food could set off alarms deliberately installed to monitor every move. The home, which should have represented safety, had become a prison. The child protection team and police knew they couldn't force statements, but they needed the truth. They used a common interrogation technique, telling the children that we already know everything. The strategy worked to break the silence, showing the kids they were no longer alone and that lying would not protect them anymore. The response was revealing. Cushman's silence when confronted, without even asking what exactly the children had said, only deepened suspicions of her guilt. If she were innocent, she would have demanded details, denied the accusations, or at least shown surprise. Instead, she remained quiet, as if acknowledging that her house of lies was about to collapse. From that moment, investigators understood they had to go beyond a simple inspection. What was at stake wasn't the cleanliness of a home. It was the survival of children trapped in a carefully engineered cycle of terror. After the first revelations, the police knew they could not leave the situation as it was. Just a few days later, state agents returned to the residence with a search warrant in hand. This time, it was no longer about a simple inspection. It was the chance to uncover physical evidence that would confirm the children's disturbing accounts. From the moment they arrived, officers made it clear that the operation would be thorough. Cell phones were seized, along with access codes, so that specialists could extract files and conversations. The tension was visible on the faces of Jamie Cushman and her partner, James Sena. Even as they tried to appear cooperative, their unease betrayed that something was being hidden. With every step through the house, police noticed details that didn't align with normal life. Chains tucked away, padlocks near beds, and makeshift setups designed to restrain movement. These discoveries began to transform suspicions into certainty. This residence was not simply unkempt, it was a place of confinement. Among the most important items seized were the suspects' cell phones. In cases like this, devices often act as vaults of secrets, storing photos, videos, messages, even live streams that reveal far more than testimony alone. And that is exactly what investigators found. Inside the digital memory were disturbing records, exposing with clarity the suffering inflicted on the children. The images were not rumors or vague accusations. They were concrete, irrefutable evidence of unimaginable abuse, filmed by the perpetrators themselves. The shock among agents was immediate. What once seemed like speculation or exaggeration was now undeniable reality. With these discoveries, the case shifted to another level. It was no longer about interpreting children's statements or debating neglect. The evidence pointed to a deliberate system of cruelty, maintained through methods of control and humiliation. And this was only the beginning of the horror that would be revealed. Armed with the warrant, police combed through every room in Jamie Cushman's home. What they uncovered confirmed the darkest reports. Next to beds, chains with padlocks were stashed in drawers and boxes, ready to be used for restraint. In other rooms, makeshift alarms were wired to doors and windows to sound if a child tried to escape. With every piece of furniture turned over, the sense of horror deepened. Bathrooms that had been unusable during the first visit were now hastily cleaned up, a transparent attempt to disguise reality. But the deception didn't hold. The odor of urine lingered in the hallways, and marks on the floor suggested that someone had been kept restrained for long periods. The family home had, in truth, become a disguised detention center. The greatest shock came when investigators stepped into the backyard. There they found a small improvised structure with windows covered and a crude air conditioning unit. Inside, the space was even more disturbing. A bed, chains, cameras, and even a crossbow leaning in a corner. To police, there was no doubt. This was a modern dungeon. The explanations given by Sina and Cushman were contradictory. At times, they claimed the building was just a storage shed. At others, that it was used as a shelter for acquaintances. Nothing, however, explained the presence of restraints or the sealed structure clearly designed to keep someone trapped inside. The discovery of this dungeon marked a turning point in the investigation. It was no longer just about mistreatment, but about kidnapping and systematic torture. Officers knew that the evidence collected there would be decisive in dismantling the suspect's narrative and exposing the true scope of the nightmare these children endured daily. With the first pieces of evidence in hand, an inevitable question arose. How could this situation have lasted so many years without intervention? Investigators soon discovered that reports against Jamie Cushman had been made as far back as 2014. Former neighbors, friends, and even relatives had repeatedly contacted Child Protective Services, reporting abuse and neglect. Yet nothing concrete was ever done. Matthew, a former family friend, said he had called the authorities multiple times. To him, it always felt as if there was advance notice. Every time CPS was alerted, the house was quickly cleaned up, and the children presented as though everything was fine. This pattern raised suspicions that someone inside the system was tipping Cushman off, allowing her to hide the most obvious signs of abuse. Another alarming detail was the role of local sheriff Doug Bowman. During questioning, he claimed he had never seen anything that justified removing the children, describing the home merely as messy. But witnesses insisted that the signs of abuse were clear and frequent. To state investigators, it seemed impossible that an officer with so many years of experience could have missed the chains and padlocks now exposed in every room. Bowman's statements revealed more than neglect. They showed a serious failure in law enforcement. By minimizing the home's conditions and dismissing serious reports as exaggerations, he helped enable the abuse to continue for nearly a decade. That complacency, whether born of negligence or choice, was one of the factors that most outraged the public once the case came to light. When forensic experts finally accessed the seized phones and the cameras installed inside the house, what they saw surpassed all expectations. Hundreds of videos showed the children being subjected to humiliating and cruel situations, many filmed by the perpetrators themselves. In one of the most shocking recordings, the children were forced to eat spaghetti dumped raw into a bathtub, using only their hands, like animals. The footage also revealed repeated practices of physical and psychological punishment. Children chained to beds, denied food, forced to stay in painful positions for hours, or made to ingest disgusting mixtures of blended food. These were not isolated incidents, but part of a carefully planned system of torture. Each image reinforced that suffering was routine, not the result of occasional loss of control. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the recordings was how naturally Cushman and Sena treated the violence. In text messages exchanged between them, they complained about being irritated with the children and then described punishments they applied as if they were ordinary measures. To them, the children's pain seemed irrelevant, even something to laugh about. In some instances, the violence was accompanied by twisted justifications, such as claiming that chaining children was an acceptable form of discipline. This rationalization showed how cruelty had become normalized within the home. It was not simply a place of mistreatment, but a machine of psychological and physical abuse where the victim's humanity was slowly erased. Among those who had lived closely with Jamie Cushman was Alicia Brand, a former roommate and friend who, for years, tried to alert authorities. She said she had made dozens of calls to Child Protective Services, often to no avail. In her words, she would spend hours repeating the same story to different operators, only to receive vague promises that someone would look into it. For her, every official visit ended in frustration. Nothing was formally reported, and the abuse continued. Alicia described witnessing direct violence, children dragged by their hair or ears, forced to stand in corners for days, and humiliated by being left in their underwear. Once, after refusing to apply the same harsh discipline Cushman demanded, she was physically assaulted by Jamie herself, punched in the chest. From that moment, she knew she could never defy Cushman's authority without facing retaliation. Another crucial voice was that of Jamie McDaniel, who met Cushman as a teenager. She recalled moments of aggression that began when she was only 15. On one occasion, she was shoved against a wall, struck in the face, and then pinned under a couch, deliberately flipped onto her. To make it worse, Cushman and others in the home sat on top of the couch, forcing her to remain trapped until she spiraled into a panic attack, losing control of her own body. McDaniel also revealed that she had seen Cushman plan punishments like carefully designed rituals. This behavior wasn't the result of sudden outbursts of anger. It reflected a mind that seemed to take satisfaction in exercising absolute power over those under her control. The details McDaniel provided reinforced the same pattern seen in the recordings. The violence was constant, deliberate, and sustained by a twisted logic of domination. After collecting physical evidence and testimony from adults, investigators needed to hear directly from the children in a safe environment. For this, forensic specialists conducted delicate interviews, using techniques designed to avoid any suggestion or influence. What the children revealed confirmed and expanded the gravity of the case. One boy casually described having chains on his ankles as though it were part of everyday life. He said that if he tried to leave the room, an alarm would sound, exposing his attempt at freedom. Another, even younger, revealed that he often didn't even consider himself a person, repeating phrases that showed how deeply his self-worth had been destroyed. These accounts proved that, for the children, pain had already been normalized, internalized, as though it were an unavoidable condition of life. The children also explained that food was often used as punishment. They recalled being forced to eat under degrading circumstances, meals thrown on the floor, mixed into bathtubs, or blended into revolting combinations. One girl described being forced to perform exhausting exercises for hours as a penalty while being denied normal meals. Another heartbreaking detail came from a child who said that at times, even the family pets were fed better than they were. Beyond hunger, shame was a constant weapon. One of the victims recalled being forced to remain in only underwear for days as a form of public humiliation. These practices, though varying in intensity, shared the same goal: to destroy any sense of dignity. What should have been discipline was transformed into a mechanism of psychological and physical torture, reinforcing Cushman's absolute authority over the household. As investigators presented the cell phone messages and footage from inside the home, the contradictions in the accounts of Jamie Cushman and James Sena began to crumble. Sena, who initially denied direct involvement in the abuse, was confronted with videos showing her actively participating in multiple incidents. In one, she helped restrain a child with chains. In another, she could be seen screaming and threatening physical punishment. The recovered messages were even more revealing. Text exchanges between Sena and Cushman included complaints about being tired of the children's behavior, followed by comments about knocking them out or beating them until they shut up. These were not spur-of-the-moment remarks spoken in anger. They were written records that demonstrated premeditation and complicity. This digital evidence dismantled any attempt to claim innocence or ignorance. During interrogation, Sena was pressured to choose between continuing to protect Cushman or thinking of her own children. That emotional dilemma broke her resistance. Through tears, she admitted to participating in punishments, Though she tried to shift most of the blame onto her partner, her sudden change of stance revealed how much Cushman's fear and manipulation influenced even the adults around her. Cushman, on the other hand, maintained an unusual calm even when faced with damning evidence. Instead of showing outrage or remorse, she acted as though she still had control over the narrative. When she was finally arrested, she didn't even ask why. Her silence struck investigators not as shock, but as acceptance of the inevitable. These moments of confrontation marked the definitive turning point in the case. With irrefutable digital evidence, consistent testimony, and partial confessions, authorities now had a solid case to move forward with the most serious charges. The castle of lies that had been built for years was collapsing before the eyes of justice. With the mountain of evidence gathered, recordings, messages, testimony, and partial confessions, the district attorney's office presented a robust case against Jamie Cushman, James Sena, and Laura Melanson. The prosecution described the Texaco residence as a true domestic torture camp, where children were treated as prisoners instead of sons and daughters. The charges against Cushman included more than 20 counts of intentional child abuse, along with conspiracy and obstruction of justice. To reduce her sentence, she accepted a plea deal, admitting guilt to part of the charges. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Sena, in turn, was sentenced to 6 years after admitting involvement in 4 counts of child abuse. Laura, who also actively participated in the assaults, faced 2 convictions and received a sentence equivalent to Sena's. Although the sentences provided some sense of justice, many felt that nothing could truly compensate for the years of pain and humiliation endured by the victims. The case's impact spread across New Mexico, sparking debates about the failures of the child protection system and the accountability of local authorities who had ignored repeated warnings for years. Despite the horrors they had endured, the children's fate brought a measure of relief. Under new guardianship, they received medical and psychological care, and for the first time in years were able to experience a safe routine. Reports soon showed significant improvements: weight gain, returning to school, and integration into more stable homes. Former friends and family members who had tried to report the abuse in the past also felt some comfort knowing that the children were finally free from oppression. Still, the trauma left by years in captivity would require long-term support for them to rebuild their lives. For many involved in the case, the hope was that the children could turn pain into strength and never again be marked by such cruelty. In the end, the house in Texaco became a symbol of institutional failure and the urgent need to protect the most vulnerable. But it also stood as proof that even after years of silence, the truth always finds a way to come to light.
Enjoyed this case? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories like this. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Hit the like button to support our work and share this video with fellow true crime fans.